Perfect. So Frank, if you want to start there.
Okay. Thanks very much, Colin. I'll just share my screen. Just bear with me one moment. Right, so thanks very much for the opportunity to talk at this webinar. I'm going to give an introduction to the Irish energy storage market. So I will start by saying a little bit about Ireland and why Ireland may be similar in many ways, but different in a few ways to countries in continental Europe on the mainland. So Ireland has a renewable electricity target of 80% by 2030, and that's an average over the year. So that means at times that 90 or maybe approaching 100% of the electricity going into the grid will be from non-synchronous wind and solar. And that creates huge challenges to the grid, to operate the grid like that. It was never designed to operate with that much non-synchronous machines. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on my next slide. The other thing about the very high target is that we need to build a lot of wind and solar, and that means that there will be excess wind and solar at times. And the question then is, how do you make most use of that? Otherwise, you have to curtail it, and it makes the economics of building the wind and solar difficult. So what do you do with the excess? You can store it as electricity in batteries, pumped hydro, liquid air energy storage, you know, various ways of storing it as electricity, and then use it when the demand is higher than the wind generation. You can convert it to green hydrogen, and then you can either store that green hydrogen for reconversion to electricity, or you can use it for transport, or you can use it for heating. In fact, you'll be using it, you know, for all of those things, and also putting it directly into the existing gas grid. And you can also use it to convert to heat for immediate usage, or to store that heat. And if you can store that heat, then you effectively have a dispatchable demand, which is of value to the grid. So if you have a large industrial process, currently say on gas or oil, you can then convert that to electricity, and if you have energy storage, you can take that electricity at times when there's excess wind or solar. So I said I'd explain a bit about the grid stability. Ireland is it's a small island with no AC interconnection. When I say Ireland, I'm talking about Ireland both north and south. So a single generator of say 300 or 400 megawatts, or an interconnector which could be 500 megawatts or could be more when we get connected to France. If it trips out, it is a very large percentage of the total demand. So so effectively, there's a lot less electricity going into the system than has been taken out by customers. So the system slows down. In other words, the frequency drops. And you can see on the graph on the top right-hand corner, the system frequency going up and down within an acceptable band. But then if a large generator trips, the system frequency takes a dramatic dip, and something has to be done to stop that system frequency from falling so dramatically and get it to recover. So what happens at the moment is that there's a lot of conventional plant with heavy steam turbines or gas turbines, and heavy generators that are synchronized to the grid, and boilers behind that. And if there's a dip in the system frequency, the generators slow down because they're synchronized to the system, and they give up their kinetic energy automatically into the grid. So that gives a bit of a boost into the grid. And then the governor valves will open up and you put more steam in. And this all happens automatically, and it happens very rapidly to increase the generation and be able to replace the lost generation. So it has plenty of kind of momentum to ride through the bumps. And then the next thing that happens is that the boiler, the firing in the boilers, that increases to give more steam or more gas through a gas turbine, and increase the generation further and compensate for the loss of generation. But if you don't have those conventional plants and you have wind and PV, then there's less and less conventional plant on the system. And so you need something that will replace that stability that the current generation plant will provide. So you need something to stabilize the grid without having to produce energy, because if you're using it to produce energy, then you're displacing the wind and the solar. So you need very fast response, and very fast response energy storage like lithium-ion batteries will do this, and by monitoring the system frequency and ramping up its output in a fraction of a second if there's a dip in the system frequency. And when I say ramping up its output, it can go from 0 to full output in something like 150 to 200 milliseconds. Okay, demand response will also help when there's a dip in system frequency, but its reaction time is not quite as fast. And then what I was talking about in terms of the generators, that them slowing down and automatically giving up energy, that's what's called synchronous inertia. So it's inertia that's put on the system that helps to stabilize the system and stop it from bouncing around and the system frequency bouncing around. So you can have synthetic inertia instead, which would be inertia from something that's not synchronized. So something like energy storage with very fast response can provide synthetic inertia. And wind turbines can add a certain amount of synthetic inertia as well. So I'll move on to this summary of the applications on the market. So looking at the applications on the left-hand column, grid stability being the first one. Frequency regulation is, going back to the previous slide, if you look at the top right-hand corner, that kind of variations in the system frequency from kind of 50 hertz up to 50.15 and down to 49.9. You need to be able to keep it as close to the 50 as possible, and you certainly need to be able to keep it within that allowable band. And that's what frequency regulation is about. There isn't a specific product in the market looking for frequency regulation. It's kind of it is an implicit incentive in the way that say a battery storage plant or any energy storage plant or demand response would respond to changes in system frequency. So if you say I'll respond when the system frequency falls to 49.9, then you're not providing any regulation. Whereas if you say I will provide a response even if the system frequency only falls to 49.985, then you're providing some frequency regulation to keep it within a very close band of 50 hertz. Inertia is another application, and I mentioned about synthetic inertia. The main thing that the grid are looking for is synchronous inertia, which happens automatically because the plant is synchronized. And the plant for that would be synchronous condensers, which are effectively a generator or electric motor with a big flywheel to add extra mass onto it. So that effectively gives it more momentum to kind of ride through the bumps. And And then there is the kind of from 150 milliseconds out to 10 seconds, which is the fast frequency response. And the column on the right is the market that there is to pay for these applications. So there is a product called fast frequency response. You'll notice the title on that top right-hand box, DS3 system services. The system services payments by the EirGrid to generators or energy storage or things like synchronous condensers is under a market that's known as DS3, which is the delivery of a secure and safe system, and that's where the DS cubed comes from. So going back to the table again, the applications, then there's reserves, which is replacing a lost generation in the time frame from 5 seconds out to 20 minutes. And there is a market, there's a good market for that, for primary, secondary, and tertiary reserves that go from that kind of 5 seconds. The primary is the response you can give within 5 seconds and maintain it for 10 seconds. And then secondary picks up the next kind of time frame, and then tertiary picks up the next time frame. And there are two kinds of tertiary reserve, 1 and 2, that goes at the 2 goes out to 20 minutes. Then there's energy balancing. And there's different kind of time frames, short duration, which you could consider as something like 2 to 4 hours, medium 4 to 6 hours, and long from kind of 6 to 10 or 12 hours, and then very long duration, which would be out to weeks, like 2 or 3 weeks. And the market for that is the energy market, that you can take in, charge up your storage when prices are low, and then put the power back into the grid when prices are high. So you're getting an arbitrage energy market revenue from that. And once you go to medium duration and the longer duration, you're into the capacity market as well. And you can get a certain amount in the capacity market in the shorter duration too. So they're the revenue streams that make that worthwhile. At the moment, the revenues are not sufficient for anything certainly beyond short duration, because the difference in prices, the arbitrage, you're not getting enough money on that, and you're not getting enough money on the capacity markets. So ramping is, let's say, Ireland is expecting a weather front to come and the wind to increase dramatically at, say, 10 o'clock in the morning. But supposing that front, it doesn't come as early as is expected, and doesn't come until 11 o'clock, then you could be short maybe 3,000 megawatts between 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock. So you need something to ramp up to provide that to compensate for the fact that the wind hasn't risen in the way that it was expected by the grid. So there are different markets in that in terms of the ramping margins, different kind of time horizons and different durations. So ramping margin 1 would be a time horizon of 1 hour. So you're given 1 hour's notice and you have to maintain that output for 2 hours. Ramping margin 2 is you get 3 hours notice and you have to maintain it for 5 hours. And RM3 is you get 8 hours notice and you have to maintain it for 8 hours. So there are various technologies that can provide those ramping margins. There's a huge market, I suppose, coming in electricity, heating and cooling and storage. And you can imagine a triangle with electricity at one corner, heating at another corner, and cooling at another corner. And we're really talking about sort of industrial processes here. You can change from electricity to heating, electricity from cooling. You can change from any one of those three to any of the other ones. So that gives great flexibility, and the new market requires great flexibility because of the uncertainty in the output from wind and solar. Now, there isn't really a market yet for dispatchable demand, but that is something that may come. District heating and storage is not well developed. Sorry, district heating is not well developed in Ireland. I personally wonder about district heating now, that heating is likely to be electrified, and therefore does it make sense to provide all your heat centrally and then have it going through pipes to people's houses, rather than have the electricity go through the wires to people's houses and then have the heating generated in each house, converted from electricity in each house. So I'm not sure what the market for district heating is going to be in Ireland. There's a big market developing in commercial and residential PV with storage, and the whole purpose of that is to optimize the on-site usage. So that implies the opportunity to provide control systems and so on into that market. And that's because the export value of the electricity is very low in comparison to the value at a kind of a retail level of using it on site, because effectively the value of the electricity is not just the generation value, but it's also the transmission and distribution costs and so on. Demand response, there's a big market in demand response, and the market for that is the capacity market and also the system services market. There's an opportunity for peak lopping, and the market for that really is the electricity retail market, where you can minimize your maximum demand and maybe your maximum import capacity. And so you're making savings on your use of system charges, on your PSO charges, and on your energy charges. Smart networks is a huge area that's coming in, and as an emerging market, there are huge opportunities for new sort of controls for within that market to optimize the use of the network. Grid congestion, both at the distribution level and at the transmission level, there's no market yet, but one of the big constraints in meeting our targets is getting grid connections for wind farms, solar farms, and energy storage plants. And that's because of grid congestion. So if you can put in strategically placed energy storage, even if it's only a value for maybe 5 years, there should be a revenue stream for that will allow more connections within that 5 years until such time as the grid is reinforced in that area. And some of a lot of the energy storage modules are kind of they're individual modules that could be moved to a new location. And green hydrogen is seen as the kind of the panacea for what happens when there's no wind for 2 or 3 weeks, that you store the energy as green hydrogen. So just to summarize in terms of conclusions, the markets that I see, particularly for SMEs providing products into these markets, the short duration sort of half-hour batteries for fast response and reserve, that's pretty well saturated, and it's a very well established market. So the opportunities are more in the smart grid area, grid congestion, that kind of triangulation of electricity, heating and cooling, combined with storage. There's huge new opportunities for new thinking within that area. Commercial and residential demand with PV and storage, demand response, peak lopping, green hydrogen. There's multiple markets within the green hydrogen. And then the sort of question marks whether there are opportunities in the kind of medium and long duration storage. There are multiple technologies and applications, but a lot of those are already kind of established. Synchronous inertia, synchronous condensers and synthetic inertia. probably already fairly well established, and then frequency regulation, again, reasonably well established. So I hope that gives an overview of the opportunities in the energy storage market for SMEs. Thank you very much. If anybody has questions or want to come back to me on anything, my email address is there. Thanks very much.
Thanks for that, Frank. Yeah, Betty.
Frank, thank you very much for that presentation. As you know from our work through the Energy Storage Association and others, we're very familiar with the larger scale energy storage elements. But I'm just inquiring, I suppose, and it's a broad question. When we analyze the different technologies and through the STEPS project, we've looked across a lot. It seems to come back to the availability of lithium-ion batteries, but we have looked at smaller hydrogen fuel cells and other elements that just haven't made it through that technology readiness level. Is there anything from your vast experience in the ESB and your significant work over the last decade in terms of trialing at, I suppose, a grid scale is probably where you're most familiar? Are there any technologies that you have in your mind that you think could crack this for the kind of SME or the smaller energy user outside of the current lithium-ion battery? And the reason I say outside of the current lithium-ion battery is, again, it's down to duration of storage. And I was only talking to a stakeholder yesterday who had installed solar and PV in his domestic dwelling and installed a battery about 3 years ago. But he informed me that he's disconnected the battery in the last couple of summers because they're just not using it during the day while they're not in the house, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's a technology question, really, that would see us being able to be more flexible in homes where, you know, people are not there during the day, which is, or even more so, seasonal storage where we're not using it during the summer, or we're producing it in the summer with solar and needing it in the winter. I know that's a very broad question, but it's a technology focused one.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there are technologies coming in terms of storing the energy as heat in just, you know, metal. You know, a simple way of doing it, or storing the heat as water, which I suppose is what people are doing, you know, with their PV, that they're putting most of the energy into heating their hot water in their hot water tank, which is then well insulated. I suppose also, you know, there are all sorts of different kind of battery technologies coming, and lithium-ion, the reason why lithium-ion is so used globally is because it's also used for EVs. So it's been mass produced, and that's brought the price down. But there are other technologies like sodium-ion, which would take up more space, but in terms of you know, stationary batteries, as distinct from batteries in vehicles, the extra space probably doesn't matter a huge amount. So there are new technologies coming that will replace lithium-ion batteries. Sorry, there are a couple of other technologies as well, like flywheels. Flywheels would be very good from the point of view of frequency regulation, and that is something that might become more useful. They're not economic at the moment because they're not competitive with lithium-ion batteries. But if you needed something for frequency regulation, it's something that's been used all of the time. It's constantly either absorbing power or giving out power. So effectively, the cycling on it is a very heavy duty, and that's where something like flywheels comes in. So there may be opportunities for technologies that aren't currently economic when we get up to the sort of 90% and approaching the 100% wind and solar on the system, and then the frequency regulation becomes a problem. So there may be additional value recognized by the grid in that, and that might make some new technologies economic.
Perfect. So I might pass on there now to Neil O'Brien from the National University of Ireland, Galway. Neil's going to discuss the Irish market analysis that has come out of the STEPS project. So Neil, if you want to share your slides now. You're muted.
Right, try again. Can you hear me okay now?
Yep, perfect.
Perfect, great. Well, look, thank you very much to the Southeast Energy Agency for inviting me here today. Basically, I'm with NUI Galway and I suppose the project manager for the for NUI Galway within the STEPS project, and you can see our team there today. So I'm discussing Irish market analysis from the STEPS project. Right, so I'll try to move on these slides. Always find it a bit of a stress. So that's our team anyway. We're looking at a number of different things. The University of Galway we're called now. So that's a recent thing. We changed our name from National University of Ireland Galway to University of Galway. So we have a core team, so involved in many different disciplines, and you know, from engineering, and we've got a strong focus now on economics as well. So we're not just looking at the technical aspects of it, but also the economic aspects within the University of Galway. So my own focus is on the policy area. So that's why I'm here today. So just briefly, you know, about STEPS. We had a focus on small and medium enterprises in the NWE area, and that was across the project. So we did our work within Ireland, and we did our work, you know, in the other 4 countries involved in the STEPS project. So it's very much looking at a European market, but at a local market at the same time. So the whole purpose of Interreg, it's sort of, I suppose, interregional. You know, but it's focusing on regions, but at the same time bringing people together and looking at it from a European point of view as well. So, you know, it's basically sort of bottom up and top down is the approach that it tries to take. So the three key aspects of the project in relation to SMEs is regional energy regulation and legislation being explored, the engagement with actual end users. So that's a key thing that doesn't happen quite often, is engagement with end users in relation to small and medium enterprises. So we've had a huge effort within the project from the business support partners, and indeed supported by knowledge institutes such as my own, you know, in terms of identifying test beds and matching users up. I'm just trying to give a bit of context to the project to explain exactly where we're coming from in terms of the policy aspects we're doing. So we're all about connecting SMEs with suitable end users from all across the region. That's the Northwest Europe region. So we're talking about let me try and get this right now. The countries involved are Ireland, the UK, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany. So it's very much, you know, we're not sort of working across Eastern Europe. We're working very much in the western part of Europe and the northern western part of Europe. So some of the SMEs who've gone through the project, I just wanted to sort of acknowledge and list them. I know there are some people here from 1 or 2 of those SMEs today. Clean Tech Renewables, Gloss Energy, Green Hydrogen, Sun Harvester, Dare Tech, Crest Pro Power, Skyline Solar Homes, and Sunstream Energy. And the 3 partners on the project who come from Ireland. Obviously, this webinar is organised by the Southeast Energy Agency, who've also changed their name recently, which is a good thing. They're expanding and getting ever bigger and more prominent. And also the Galway Energy Co-op is another one of our partners. So between us all, we've been supporting Irish SMEs through the STEPS programme. So just in terms of energy storage, one of the first things we did at a Knowledge Institute level was looked at the classification of energy storage technologies. So you'll see here they're broadly sort of listed under 5 headings: mechanical, chemical, electrical, electrochemical, and thermal. So there were a few questions there in relation to the sort of different technologies and how they relate to Ireland. So if I could just quickly go through them, we have under mechanical, we'd be familiar with Turlough, and I'll just say a bit more about that in a minute, you know, in terms of pumped hydro energy storage. Compressed air energy storage is another option. I don't think that's particularly prominent in Ireland. And flywheels, I think Frank was just talking about flywheel, or the potential of flywheels there a few minutes ago, I think. In terms of chemical, power to gas and fuel cells, we'd be more familiar with fuel cells, I think. Electrical, obviously, you know, the superconducting magnetism, that's one type of energy storage, and supercapacitor energy storage is another. We'd all be familiar with batteries. Obviously, batteries tend to dominate discussions about energy storage, and probably you know, probably not wisely so, because they're very much something you know, for the here and now. They tend to be fairly short term in terms of grid connections and so on. And we probably need to stress far more on long-term energy storage, or indeed distributed energy storage. But batteries certainly are probably the simplest thing to use in many ways in the current sort of economic climate and the current technology climate. Thermal storage, again, is something that we certainly shouldn't ignore. Liquid air energy storage and phase change materials are the two that were you know, discussed there. But one of the SMEs we had actually was looking at the potential of you know, using heating as an energy storage mechanism. Okay, so just a quick look at the sort of main types of energy storage that do exist in Ireland. Pumped hydroelectric storage, again, this goes back a long way. You can see a picture of Turlough Hill there. So a long time ago this was put in place. So it uses electricity basically to pump water to an uphill reservoir, and it later releases the water through a turbine to generate electricity. And it stores relatively large amounts of electricity. So Turlough in Wicklow has a total capacity of 292 megawatts. It peaked in 2013, and the efficiency has fallen from the 1990s, over 70% to about 54% in 2020. So, I mean, pumped storage is, you know, I suppose a simple form of energy storage, a more basic form. It's a mechanical form of storage, and it's not classed as hydro, and it's not considered renewable energy. But what it does do is it allows, you know, it's very helpful in terms of the renewable energies, in terms of it allows storage of energy that might be in excess. You know, sometimes we have peak wind, or we have peak solar, or peak whatever. You know, it is a form of energy storage. It's probably the best one we've historically had in Ireland. So at the moment, over 2.5 gigawatts of grid scale battery storage is in development in Ireland, and 6 projects are currently operational in the country, 4 of which were added in 2021. So we're focusing a lot on batteries. So 2.5 gigawatts is significant. And in 2020, the first 2 utility scale battery storage projects became operational. Many of you will be familiar with those in the Republic of Ireland. 11 megawatts in Killathmoy project by Statkraft was completed, followed by the 100 megawatt project from Hanwha Energy and Lumclune Energy. So many of you will be familiar with those projects, and indeed the newer projects which are both planned and have already become operational in recent times. So this is fairly new stuff. but the plan basically is, as it currently stands, is to have 2.5 gigawatts of grid scale battery storage. Now, any of you from countries like Germany and so on, I think there might be one or two people from bigger countries here, they look at 2.5 gigawatts and say, so what? But in Irish terms, that's a significant amount of storage, obviously. Okay, I wanted to show you the EU roadmap for renewable hydrogen production. So green hydrogen, there's a lot of talk about green hydrogen. Obviously, in terms of wind, Ireland is very heavily reliant on wind in terms of renewable energy. And indeed, where I come from, Galway, the county, it produces more electricity from wind than it actually uses in terms of electricity. It's one of the few places, I think, which actually does that. But what happens when the wind, when there's an excess of wind? At the moment, quite often the energy is wasted. So there is a project going on in the Galway Wind Park, for example, to produce green hydrogen. And green hydrogen is obviously hydrogen produced by renewable energy, so it's not coming from fossil fuel sources. So it's kind of like a gold standard in some ways, but in terms of, it is quite a young technology again to actually produce hydrogen, and indeed efficiency levels and the type of electrolyzers are quite they're very much under development. So anyway, from a European point of view, phase 1 is from 20 to 24 to decarbonize existing hydrogen production and develop electrolyzers for large scale production. Phase 2 is to integrate hydrogen into the energy system with at least 40 gigawatts of renewable hydrogen electrolyzers by 2030. And that's equivalent to 10 megatons of renewable hydrogen. And phase 3 from 2030 to 2050 is renewable hydrogen technologies to reach maturity deployment at large scale to reach hard to decarbonize sectors. So that's something that very much will be, you're going to hear a lot more about this, I suspect. I mean, green hydrogen is something that is logical. It's not rocket science at all, although potentially I think hydrogen can be used for rockets, but it really is something which is very much happening at the moment, and it suits Ireland quite well, potentially. As a result of the type of renewable energies that have been developed. And there's a particular push on for offshore wind in Ireland. Okay, I want to just go through two key things in terms of policy that we're doing within the STEPS project. One is we're developing a policy catalogue, and I want to acknowledge Baxen Company and indeed US Netherlands, our lead partners for this. But we're looking at it from a country by country point of view, but also from a European point of view. So the main target, the guide that we're developing, who's that for? We're looking at it, as I said, from an Irish policy level. We're looking at it from policy level in the different regions and the different countries that STEPS is involved with. But we're also looking at it, to inform policymakers and indeed, finally, to inform decision makers at a European level too. So the main target is policymakers, and the guide is designed to be suitable for policymakers to take policy information cards to high-level decision makers. That's what it's about. So the three ways to navigate through the report which is being produced are a comparative grid, and that's a paper grid and not an energy grid. So there's no confusion on that one. Policy roles, we're sorting out policies by relevant roles. And then I think slightly innovatively using a policy fit compass, so mapping policies by market, government role and level of commitment. So just informing you of that work which is going on within the STEPS project. And I think finally now the economic analysis is being carried out in NUI Galway. We're doing it for the Irish market specifically, but we're looking at it again in a European context. So basically, we're looking at wind energy and storage and trying to address the curtailment issue from an economic point of view. So just very quickly, you know, a bit of background as well. I hope this doesn't contradict anything Frank said, but I don't think it does. EU greenhouse gas emissions reductions of 55% by 2030. The targets are EU renewable energy target 40% by 2030, and new installations of 30 gigawatt wind every year required double current expected EU levels. So the Irish targets are, as Frank said, 80% renewable electricity by 2030. Intermittency is a huge issue. So again, the storage is key to helping to solve that. Energy storage really is something that we all need to focus on. It's hugely important in the current economic climate. I won't go through this slide in detail, but it's here. You know, the copy of these slides, we're going to share these. You can have a look at that, but just, you know, risks in terms of economics is trade and day ahead market dependent on accuracy and price predictions. You know, and the carbon and fossil fuel costs are crucial. So just down to the gap, there's no real socio-economic study at the moment to assess wind farm developer preferences for storage or policy mechanism changes. And the big issue really is, you know, how that energy is stored. Is it stored close to the wind farm in small, you know, is it under the control of the wind farm, or are we talking about sort of shared storage capacity in terms of big battery systems? Are we talking about long-term storage? Are we talking about short-term storage? So, you know, there's all sorts of potentials, or indeed, are we looking, you know, at the smart grid as a form of energy storage as well? That's something perhaps not that many people discuss. So, you know, actually storing things in the batteries of cars, for example, which are waiting for a cheap price, there is potential there. Okay, so what we're doing in relation to the economic study is we're doing a survey of wind farm developers. So if there's any of you on this call, please get in touch with us. So we're looking to assess preferences for storage, and this includes a choice experiment. So that's an economic instrument, and some of the potential attributes may also include type of storage, duration of storage, capacity, footprint, maturity of technology, other revenue measures, and ability to store energy from the grid, and development of energy trade market. So I don't want to go into those in detail, but if there's any questions about any of those, perfect. So that's it from me. So I'd like to hand back to my colleagues at Southeast Energy, and thank you very much for hosting this webinar. And I'm certainly open for questions. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Neil. Sorry, just having a small technical issue there. There we go. So DV, is DV on the call?
Eddie, do you want to present? I sent this presentation. Colin can put online the presentation.
Oh yeah, I have it here. Okay. Two seconds here now. I'll just share my slide.
There's somebody asking email address, Neil.
I'm just going to type that into the chat, DV.
Okay, yeah.
That's great. And there's another question there, which I think is more for Frank, in relation to district heating, but it's one that I'd be very interested about because I've just back from seeing district heating scheme in Germany.
Yeah, so if you do have questions, do pop them in the chat and we can run to them just when Paddy's finished. You're on mute there, Paddy. I'm not sure if you're...
No, sorry, apologies. Actually, I'm going to put on my headset because it's less background noise. Just bear with me 1 second, folks. Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yep, that's perfect.
Super. Okay, well, initially, just a brief introduction to the Southeast Energy Agency. So the Southeast Energy Agency was formerly Cardiff Kilkenny Energy Agency, and in 2018, Wexford joined the company, became a member of the company, and we moved to Three Counties Energy Agency. So for the first 18 months or so of this STEPS project, we were known as 3CEA. But at the end of September, we welcomed Waterford City and County as members of the board and the company. And we have transitioned to the Southeast Energy Agency, which ironically, in an interreg EU world, maps precisely the NUTS 3 region as part of the southern region. So where the southeast region is one of the NUTS 3 regions. So that's interesting in terms of this regional approach, and a little bit of a touch on what Niall had referenced there in some of their findings in terms of the regional markets and regional work. So within this project, again, the regional energy regulation piece is something that we don't have the benefit of in Ireland traditionally, and maybe we can discuss this a little bit further. All of our energy regulation is centrally formed at a national level, and that is something that we could look at and perhaps look at in terms of opportunity. But as of now, all of our regulation is centrally formed. Engagement with actual end users then will take place in, these user boards. So we are the business to business element of this. So the SMEs that our colleagues in the STEPS project in the university and research side have been reviewing and vetting in terms of their technology readiness level would have applied through a voucher program. And when those vouchers were reviewed and approved, then there's a bundle of test sites that have been identified through vouchers where a storage solution and an SME providing that storage solution has been partnered with an end user. And these end users are people that have expressed an interest, or we've identified a need with, in terms of their energy use and potential to store and optimize, I suppose, their demand side operation as a business. Then connecting, those SMEs has been quite successful. We're still in the process of finalizing the last few test sites, and it's been a challenging enough connection process due to COVID and other elements that have cropped in there. But we're delighted to say that we will have a number of test beds up and running over this winter period, and be able to report on some of the major findings across the varying technologies that we have trialed. So some of the technologies around metering controls, some are around storage. And as I touched on with my question with Frank earlier on in the session, we had, and right across the Interreg partnership, across the Northwest Europe partners, we had received some very interesting technology solutions from SMEs, but we're not in all cases able to take them through to a test bed, and had some challenges around interacting cross borders with technologies as well, due to legislative and regulation challenges around how implementable a technology is in different jurisdictions. So again, the program, the business support program, which has been provided through vouchers, a voucher of up to €50,000 in value for the technology provider, which we call in this particular project the SME. So the test beds the energy agency would have identified, and as with Galway Energy Co-op, who are the other business support office in this program and partner, will have identified the potential sites. So in the first phase, it's really the vetting, it's the interviewing, it's the testing of their capacity to be able to implement a real opportunity in terms of a test bed. And then voucher 2 is the actual testing. So we, as the business support partner, support that SME in the implementation of test bed into the site with the end user. The end user is also an SME, so sometimes people get confused between the SMEs. But we very much have to protect that end user, because they're a beneficiary They're a stakeholder. They're a friend of both Galway Energy Co-op and a friend of the Energy Agency in the Southeast. So we have to manage that relationship very closely with the solution provider. And then once that is integrated and implemented into that business without causing any business interruption or any health and safety risks or any concerns around, access and egress from contractors or suppliers in and out of that live and active business, one of which is a local authority building or a municipal office, Wexford County Hall. And another example is a fruit and vegetable production facility in South Kilkenny, who have had solar installed since 2015 and looking to put more on for their own internal use rather than for export. And then the final phase is product testing. So once the SME technology or the solution provider has the technology implemented into site, then we start the product testing and analysis. And during this process is very much, our academic partners in NUIG and right across the European partners. There's strenuous and quite an evidence-based academic supervision of how these are performing. And I suppose results and learnings from that will be taken forward as part of this project and maybe taken forward into some larger rollouts. So business support partners are very much working through right across Europe, and the four that we are looking at are very much underway. County Hall was done in the first phase, and that's pretty much in its research and testing phase, which will culminate at the end of 2023. And then we have 3 suppliers there supplying into 2 of them in the agriculture space, and 1 is a port-based solution. So that's looking at some marine opportunities for demand-side operations. So it's been quite an interesting project, challenging, as I said, in terms of being able to make those partnerships work. And the business support partners, have a very key role in managing the expectations and managing those interface between the SME provider of the solution technology and the end user, the interface, which is also an SME, but not focused on energy storage, but more on, for example, dairy milk production or fruit and vegetable production or containerized logistics around the marine space. So it's been an interesting number of tests underway. So in terms of internationalization, the strategy's outlook is overcome the financial barriers for SMEs and the mid-range e-storage solutions and long-term recommendations for post-funding opportunities on a EU national and regional scale. So in other words, how are we going to take these projects forward and make them mainstream? And that, nicely takes in the presentation made by both Frank at the outset, where he's identified, some of the market opportunities, some of the technical solutions, and then through Niall's presentation, where they've identified, opportunities. But these testing sites that we have in the test beds are really going to show in real time and real space how or where the opportunities might sit in terms of creating an economic model which would support the purchase and installation of some interesting and new innovative mid-range e-storage solutions. And we're talking, in most cases, sub 100 kilowatts in this case, but this might stretch itself up towards 500 kilowatts or a megawatt, depending on the size of the SME, but it's not specifically in the area of grid storage. So that brings my presentation on the current status of the steps and our role in the Energy Agency as a business support partner, are really a trusted intermediary between the innovator or the Einstein and the real practice workplace where a business is live and operational, and just managing that Einstein or that inventor or that early stage technology into supporting it to learn and grow, and also ensuring that the business in which it's being tested can learn and grow, and taking that forward. So that brings my presentation to an end. So I'll stop share and I'll hand you back to Colin. Thank you, Colin.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Paddy. So just very quickly, Michael Dorns is going to quickly talk about the internationalization support from the STEPS project. We'll run a little over time. What I'll do then, I'll read the questions in the chat. So if you do want to hang around to hear the answer to those questions, you can. Otherwise, the Q&A will be recorded, and when I send the recording later, you can catch up on the answers. So, Michael.
Great, Colin. Thank you very much. Good morning. I'm Michael Doran. I'm the EU Projects Manager for Southeast Energy Agency. I'm just going to tell you there are a couple of extra aspects within the STEPS project that are being developed at the moment. One of them, which Paddy has already talked about, is internationalization. And there are other aspects as well. Within the project, we've decided to create what are called user boards. And the nature of the user board in each country is different. So what we've decided within Ireland, what the user board will be, is a way of continuing the project to support the industry to develop more opportunities in the future. Now, that is not necessarily the way that the other countries have done it. Some of the other countries have linked in to existing programs which are already operational in those countries, but the Irish user board will be linked into the internationalization program, because what we're hoping to do, and there will be an event probably late January, early February, which will give Irish SMEs the opportunity to cooperate with other SMEs in the other partner countries. And similarly, for the other partner countries to look at opportunities within Ireland. The Energy Agency have already discussed some of these opportunities with some of the SMEs that we're already engaged with, but we're hoping to broaden this out. So within the internationalization and the user board, we'll be extending our reach beyond the SMEs who've already been involved in the project. So if you're an energy storage SME in Ireland or elsewhere, and you have not been engaged within the STEPS project to date, that's not an issue. You'll have the opportunity, if you want to go international, if you're on the continent and you want to work in Ireland, or you're an Irish SME who wants to look at the opportunities of either working in mainland Europe or of cooperating with another SME who might be in a similar or a complementary field, we'll give you the opportunity to do that. So it's just, there are a couple of extra strings. There's approximately another year to run on the project. And as Paddy has already said, we won't have all of the outcomes prepared until probably Q1 or Q2 of 23. Most of the projects have been successful. Some have not been successful, which is not surprising because we've been working at technology readiness level 5 and 6, and some of those issues we haven't been able to overcome. But overall, it's been a successful project, and we've got another year now to embed those learnings into the Irish market, but also to build a platform on which we can build so that when the project finishes in probably September of 23, that there is a momentum that we can carry forward into the Irish market. So Colin, that's me finished. Thank you very much indeed. And thanks very much all for attending today. Colin, back to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Michael. So we'll quickly just revisit some of those questions. The first one came in from John O'Shea. Frank, this was directed towards you. So we're currently looking at opportunities to operate our DH network in Tala, 3 megawatt of heat pumps and 3 megawatt backup electric boilers to provide grid services. So it would be great to learn from the knowledge and experience from the STEPS project. Do you have any advice from that area for John?
Yeah, well, first of all, my apologies if I appear to throw cold water on district heating. It was a bit of a throwaway remark by me. I've just been thinking about the value of district heating nowadays, and the point about waste heat is well made. It is a good way of using waste heat. So I've been on the chat with with John. So John and I are going to have a chat together about that and about you know, the projects that he's working on and what, if anything, I can add to that.
Perfect. And there was just a statement came in from Clarice van Dijk. This is actually towards John as well. So John, if you're still on the call, I'll just read this for yourself. So first, I'd just like to let you know that they're developing large-scale energy storage using hydrogen bromine battery, and decoupling power and storage is keen for this development, as well as abundant active materials. And he'd like to arrange a call to see whether future projects can benefit. And so the email is in the chat as well, John, if you want to spot that out. Are there any other questions from people? You can feel free just to unmute yourself as well if you'd like to ask instead of writing it out.
Could I just come in on the district heating schemes, actually? Would that be okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting discussion. It's not strictly energy storage, but I visited a number of plants in Germany quite recently. You know, in Ireland we haven't developed those to the extent that we probably should, and there's two aspects. One is that it's crucial in a district heating scheme. We have in rural Ireland a very dispersed population, and you know, district heating schemes are not always useful in that regard, whereas in countries like Germany, you know, people can be clustered in villages, and it's much more sensible to pump heat around in that context. If you pump it over long distances, it doesn't make a lot of sense. You know, so places like Tala, for example, you know, in cities, it does make a huge amount of sense. But having said that, we have a lot of resources, you know, potentially in terms of biomass, you know, on peat, we're looking at biomass on peatlands. A lot of countries, they actually do use biomass for district heating schemes, and indeed wood chip. There's going to be a lot of wood chip potentially available in Ireland in the future due to the removal of a lot of the quilcha forests and so on. So it's worth looking at this, you know, as an energy source, particularly in terms of rising prices, because it does actually provide heat for local communities and gives them a level of control over their heating systems. So I think it's something definitely that's worth exploring a bit more.
Just if I may come in there, Colin, again through the chair.
Yep.
I suppose the district heating element is something that's gaining some traction, and this is on the back of some of the European, you know, Repower Europe need for us to take us away from the fossil dependency around fossil gas and, you know, fossil oil, fossil coal, fossil peat, or lignum, as it is in some of the Southern European and Eastern European countries. Lignite is the equivalent to coal. It's a more of a wet-based fossil fuel that's been, you know, the backbone of our European energy system in terms of generation. But just on the district heating front, you know, I have spent a lot of time looking at this, and waste heat is the obvious opportunity, because any waste is obviously, you know, in the circular economy world is a solution. But we have a significant challenge in Ireland around particularly residential density, not to mind, you know, industrial density. So some of the discussion tomorrow, and I'm on a panel at the Hydrogen Ireland conference, which is around hydrogen clustering and this clustering opportunity. So we, in another Interreg project, which you know, Michael and Devi and our colleagues in the Energy Agency are more than familiar with, is called Reg Energy. So rural energy supply meeting urban energy demand. And in that, we've identified, you know, town loads or larger towns, smaller city loads in the Southeast region. So just in the drafting of that application for some Interreg funding back in 2018, we identified there was 49 smaller towns in the Southeast region which were presently not connected, or at that time were not connected to the natural gas system. So their primary fuel or their primary heat support is coming from oil, and that oil is delivered by road into those towns. And in there, that heat is produced, and then their electricity is obviously provided through the ESB network's distribution system. So what we see in that is, if you want to cluster, and it's a really interesting observation that if you cluster 49 small towns and you add up their total oil load, and you see what the alternative opportunities are, there's a significant capital investment there in terms of a district heating system for those smaller ones. But perhaps in the larger cities, and we did a very high level feasibility on the Abbey Quarter, the old Smithwick's brewery site in Kilkenny. And, once you get past the planning challenges and some of the age-old kind of restrictions, we have this vision that if in a brownfield redevelopment in the center of a town or city like Kilkenny, that you can get the backbone of a district heating system in and start to create this cluster or community of heat trading. So it's like micro heat and mini heat and mega heat all within a connected system. Not that dissimilar to the ESB network system that we have for electricity. And that can grow organically within a city like Kilkenny. So like there has been capacity built into the new bridge that was built 5 or 6 years ago for a large scale district heating 900 millimeter diameter pipe to cross that river to connect the north and the south part of the city. I think in terms of the climate challenges and the emissions reduction targets that exist, it's definitely got a role to play. And the likes of Ballyragget, which is 2 kilometers from the Glanbia milk production plant, the waste heat from there, if we get the funding to put a district heating pipe into the village, well then that waste heat suddenly, provides a decarbonized solution for heat that otherwise might struggle to move to a heat pump solution because it's a relatively rural ESB networks distribution system, and can struggle. And again, the opportunities are great, but fundamentally in all of these instances, the CapEx versus the OpEx versus the actual saving, you almost need to be taking waste heat and, may I dare say, waste electricity into these systems to be able to make them fly financially. Otherwise, we're just going to have to subsidize them to get them built. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Paddy. So just an input there from Craig, working in Zebra in the Netherlands. So he says that they understand that there's a market for smart network in Ireland. They've developed an EMS which are testing on a couple of projects, such as energy hubs and controlling gensets on building sites. And they're looking for an opportunity to match with an Irish SME to investigate potential project opportunities. What I'll say,
Colin, I've reached out to the email is in there. I've reached out to Floris to touch on that on the earlier comment, just to see what we can link in there. And I would ask Zebra also. I'll put my email into the chat there. I would ask again to reach out to us, and we can see what we can do in terms of Galway Energy Co-op or ourselves in identifying potentially some collaborations. Am I correct in saying, and I refer to Michael, Davy and Niall on this, we're past voucher 1, voucher 2 for this particular project, but we may indeed be looking at some follow-ons where we have some learnings. We might be able to, we're all dependent on a bit of funding to make these happen. So we're out, I think, on these current vouchers.
That's correct, Paddy. The vouchers are gone, but we still have a year of collaborative work where we can support SMEs from Ireland to go into the European market, and where the European partners, for instance, Tom Cornelissen is on this seminar today, and he represents the Netherlands, so he'll be supporting Dutch SMEs who are trying to get into the Irish market. Tom, do you want to say something about that?
Yes, I want to say to Paddy, if there's a good reason to support them, although there's not a lot of money left, there's always ways to find some money. So it won't be a full voucher 2 voucher. That's not possible anymore. but make some effort, some costs, some hours to help them work together. It's always possible.
Yes, thank you, Tom. And I'm going to put in a cheeky request, which Michael and Devi might, shoot me down on here, but I do deliver a module in the second semester in Southeast Technical University on energy recovery and utilization. So I'm going to open up the opportunity for people, because a lot of what I present, I do look at sodium ion, I do look at lithium ion, I do look at, there was an iron ore battery, I think, and then there was a bromine, these various batteries. But I mean, I've had slides on these for almost 7 or 8 years now, but I haven't seen any actual SMEs or businesses that have managed to, implement them, or flow batteries that have actually managed to be successful. So anyone across Europe or within Ireland who has any successful projects or projects on the ground that they could present, I would open up the opportunity for them to present to those students in the first half of 2023. Because again, the primary area of energy recovery and utilization, in my view, is around heat and electricity, and it's applicable to homes, SMEs and large industry. But the homes and smaller SMEs is a real opportunity for us across Europe to use less and produce, as we say, the prosumer, produce more from our own natural resources. So that's open to anybody who wants to provide me with some content and slides, or also would like to present maybe I could arrange a seminar with that class, or maybe the wider engineering group in C2 to do a bit of a session on that through steps in C2 in February or March of next year.
Yes.
Tom, you want to say something?
Yes, I think as Michael said, in different countries we have different user groups. In the Netherlands, we concentrate on housing communities, housing corporations, so smaller groups of houses. And I think it might be a bit the same as what Paddy was telling about. So we might see if we combine these groups with this group with Paddy to see if there are opportunities.
Yeah, Tom, excellent. I was just going to say this fits in well with our user board as well, because what we're trying to do is to broaden the dissemination of information, and anything that we can do by using the links within steps to do that within Ireland is what we're trying to target. Okay, Colin, if you want to take over again.
Yeah, perfect. So what I'll say as well, Craig, just within the internationalization from steps, we're looking at potential matchmaking events in the future. And so when I send the slides and recording later, I'll reach out to you and I can give you a bit more information on that. I think it could be something that would benefit Zebra a lot. Just dropping down there, the best luck, Paddy. The last question is a very quick one again from John, saying he was very interested in the policy catalogue, and is there a date of completion for this?
Tom, do you know the answer to that? Okay, my understanding is that it's virtually complete and should be disseminated or released by early January, but I'll check that and come back directly to you when I've checked.
Right, perfect. And I just want
Colin, can I just come in here? It might be of interest to people on mainland Europe that our Department of Energy and the government are developing a policy for energy storage at the moment, and in fact tomorrow we're actually meeting with them, with the Secretary General of the European Association for the Storage of Energy on those issues. So there is policy development going on in Ireland at a government level on energy storage, which is great to hear. Thank you.
Perfect. And just one last check there, Magdalena, I've noticed you unmuted earlier. Was that to ask a question? No, I'd say not. So perfect. I think so. If there's no other questions, we can end it here. I'll send around the recording of this later on to everyone, along with the slides from Frank, Niall, and ourselves. Thanks for joining today. If you'd like any more information on the STEPS project, the upcoming internationalisation support, or if you'd like to link in with anyone who asked questions today or has presented today, please reach out to me and we'll see if we can make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thanks. Bye.